Very good morning. You're watching News 9. I'm Karthik Malhotra. And after Friday's crash on the Indian stock markets, GIFT Nifty is indicating a positive start for the Indian share market today. We will see what the numbers look like at 9:15 a.m. Also on the show today, the GDP growth for Q3 FY25 came in on Friday. Indian economy grew at 6.2%. Today, we question, is India's economic growth stuck in second gear? You're watching Morning Brief at 9. This is Morning Brief at 9. First up, let's look at the headlines. After Friday's crash, GIFT Nifty indicates a green start for Indian markets after the US markets closed with healthy gains on Friday. No farewell by the SEBI staff, and now a corruption charge against ex-SEBI Chief Madhabi Puri Buch along with BSE's MD and CEO and others named in an alleged stock market fraud and non-compliance involving an IPO and misleading investors. We'll bring you that story on the show. Employment is rising, but salaries are not. Niti Aayog member Arvind Virmani refers to periodic labour force survey, but reiterates Chief Economic Advisor V. Anant Nageswaran's concern that Indian companies need to pay better salaries to their employees. In the wake of Trump tariffs, India and European Union inch closer to an FTA, hopefully by the end of the year. A sequential growth quarter on quarter, but a yearly decline. Is India's Q3 GDP growth coming in at 6.2% enough to meet the growth target? We discuss on the show with economist Mitali Nikore. As India's first EV scooter maker, Hero Electric fights bankruptcy, bids are now invited after a 300 crore rupee debt default. Mahindra & Mahindra, the homegrown automaker, beats Korean Hyundai to the number 2 spot in sales and revenue for the first 10 months of this financial year. Data from April to Jan shows. Despite ongoing bribery charges in the United States, Adani Group is reviving its US investment plan in nuclear power and utilities, as per a Financial Times report. And there's a new voice on the work-life balance debate. Akash Ambani says he works 12 hours a day, thanks his wife Shloka for her understanding, and spills the beans on Father Mukesh Ambani, saying he clears emails till 2 a.m. every day. First up, let's look at the big story and the big numbers that came in by way of India's Q3 GDP growth on Friday. Now, India's GDP has grown at 6.2% for quarter 3 of this financial year. This is the October to December quarter, where India's GDP has grown 6.2%. Now, remember, this is a sequential growth from quarter 2. Because in quarter 2, the numbers were muted at just 5.6% growth. But when you look at this data on a year-to-year basis, there's been a decline from Q3 of FY24, where the GDP growth print came in at 8.6%. Now, the revised estimates for FY24 have been released at 9.2%, which means the Indian economy last year grew at 9.2%, and there are also revised growth estimates for FY25, the ongoing financial year, where growth is estimated to come in at 5.6%. So today we try and understand, is India's GDP growth on track? Because if the revised estimates for FY25 stand at 6.5%, then Q4 will have to draw some magic in terms of the GDP growth print. Now, in quarter one, remember, the GDP of India grew at 6.7%, followed by a 5.6% growth in quarter two. The latest data shows 6.2% in quarter three. So, 6.7%. 5.6% in quarter two and 6.2% in quarter three. So what is going to be the magic number for quarter four? Well, the back of the envelope calculation tells us that if India wants to grow at 6.5% for the whole year, then quarter four data will have to come in at 7.5% for quarter four to reach the annual target. Mithali Nikore, the chief economist and founder of Nikore Associates, joins me this morning. Good morning, Mithali. Thank you for being here with us while we are celebrating the quarter three growth on a sequential basis, as the data shows that we have grown at 6.2% versus 5.6% the previous quarter. The story on a year-to-year basis is not great, and then this leaves us with a big question mark on quarter four if we need to achieve the 6.5% annual growth rate.
Absolutely, Karthik. I think, first of all, let's just again, keep on reiterating and, keep on keeping the investors updated about these things, that at the moment, India is still the fastest growing emerging economy in the world. And I know I say this line almost like a parrot in every show and in every discussion we have, but it's important to keep this in mind because of the global scenario, right? We've seen the amount of uncertainty that is enveloping the world right now when we look at the different conflicts, when we look at the Trump tariffs, when we look at, the trade relationships that are going on. So I think the first thing to keep in mind is that despite all of these uncertainties, there's a fundamental strength to the Indian economy, which is related to the amount of investment that's coming in. I mean, despite everything that's happening, right? We are still seeing Tesla, for example, express interest in coming into the Indian market and, investing to capture the Indian consumer base. So, that shows us the perceived strength and, of course, the real strength of the Indian consumer. So, overall, in terms of structural factors, we are still very strong. However, what we are experiencing right now is what is called a classic cyclical downturn, right? And it's not even a downturn. We are growing at 6.2%. I mean, it's literally a reduction in the growth rate because of global factors. I mean, one of our major growth drivers is exports. And, looking at the export markets, looking at the trends in the export market, looking at the tariff scenario, definitely it's going to hit our, exports at the moment, and it's going to hit our integration with global markets and, the investment that's coming in from global markets. So as we see these global uncertainties unfold, India cannot be immune to them. And I believe that this is one of the major reasons why we are seeing a slight slowdown in the growth. But when we look at the domestic market, that's still fairly buoyant.
All right, I hear you, Mithali, and I hate to be a naysayer early morning on a Monday when we're just starting the week, but my real question is about the estimated 6.5% target for growth for FY25. This leaves us with a simple question mark that if you look at data, Q1 6.7%, Q2 5.6%, Q3 6.2%, simple arithmetic will tell us that for Q4, we will need the economy to grow at 7.5%. Now, the high frequency indicators are suggesting there is some buoyancy, but if you look at the quarter three earnings of companies, it doesn't show a very positive and doesn't paint a very rosy picture. So my simple question is, to achieve the 6.5% stated growth rate, which has actually been increased from 6.4%, the Indian economy in quarter four will have to grow 7.5%. How do we grow at 7.5% given all the global turbulence that you talked about?
No, absolutely, Karthik. I think, this is where we have to change our outlook a little bit. We have to change the way we are looking at economic growth as a country. We have to start looking at decentralization of growth over a longer term rather than looking at just the quarter growth that we are achieving. Right? Because for 10 years, we have grown continuously. Now, there will come a period where with this global turmoil and also with cyclical factors, we may not be able to grow at above 7% or above 8%. We may be able to achieve only a 5 to 6% growth rate for the next 2 to 3 years, given, the current global scenarios. Maybe that is going to happen. But at the same time, if we continue to invest in structural factors which will decentralize the growth, which will create growth in newer urban areas, which will strengthen the agricultural economy, which will create more and more climate resilience. With these fundamental factors, we cannot go wrong. If we invest in infrastructure, so with these we will not go wrong, and we will still continue to see a decent healthy growth rate of 6 to 6.5%, or even 5.5 to 6.5, in my view, is a healthy growth rate given the global scenario.
Okay.
And if we invest in the right sectors,
so what are the right sectors? You mentioned agri. Of course, agri happens to be not just the right sector because it's a large contributor to India's economy, but also because it's a great political constituency for any party that rules across states and in the center. But in addition to that, we've seen that the government has not really utilized its entire capex allocation as well. What is holding the government back from going ahead and building more roads and highways, which will add to the investment part in the GDP equation, and also lead to employment, which should in turn lead to consumption? We've seen that the capex story has witnessed a bit of a slowdown when it comes to the government.
Yeah, absolutely, Karthik. And I think one of the major reasons for that is that the government wants to now use its capex for leveraging private investment rather than just going ahead and spending on pure public sector investments. I think the future is really...
Mithali Nikore there. We will try to get her back. Mithali, I believe you're back with us. Yeah, we're talking about why the government is not unleashing its purse strings and going ahead and building more infrastructure.
Yeah, so I think, Karthik, what is happening is that the government wants private sector to come in more and more, and have more and more public-private partnerships as opposed to just pure public infrastructure plays.
But Mithali, again, for the private sector to come in, the RBI will have to continue with its rate cutting exercise. We have seen a 25 basis point rate cut, but inflation still hovering well above the 4% mark, which is beyond the RBI's comfort zone. And are we trying to oversell this cost of capital debate that becomes a bottleneck for private sector to go ahead and take debt and make investments? Or is there a real consumption slowdown as well? Because data on consumption also doesn't seem too good.
So exactly, Karthik, and this is where the government needs to come in to break this, a chicken and egg situation. Because at the end of the day, unless you invest in the newer cities, and which is what is happening in, say, an Amravati, right, where the government is coming in to back up and provide the basic infrastructure so that they can attract private investment for, high-level infrastructure, high-value infrastructure, even education and health infrastructure. But the government is providing basic roads, water, sanitation, etc. That is the correct model that we need to see in more and more cities. So certain state governments really coming in, but others need to follow.
All right, so that means we will continue to be in a supply side reform mode if the government wants the GDP target to be achieved, and the heavy lifting like we saw in COVID and post-COVID recovery days will have to be done by the government unless the private sector sees some value addition in the consumption story in India and goes ahead and makes those investments. Mithali, stay with us. Another interesting development over the weekend that I want to get your thoughts on. Now, India and the European Union will push to finalize a free trade agreement this year. Prime Minister Modi and European Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen said on Friday. Von der Leyen led the new Commission's first visit to India last week as the EU seeks to keep New Delhi on side amid rising geopolitical tensions with the United States as well as Canada. At the same time, UK's Business and Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds was also in New Delhi last week to relaunch talks on the India-UK FTA. The UK-India FTA was launched under UK's Conservative government in Jan 2022 and was paused when former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called the general election last year. India and the EU, on the other hand, resumed FTA talks in 2021 after talks collapsed in 2013. While progress has been slow since then, both EU and India now appear to be determined to strengthen ties to counter America's tariff threats and China's assertive trade practices. First, let's listen in to what Ursula von der Leyen had to say, as well as what Prime Minister Modi had to say on artificial intelligence being the bedrock of this partnership.
The potential is immense. Europe is already India's biggest trading partner. Last year alone, we exchanged 120 billion worth of goods, and over the past 2 decades, our trade has tripled. All this is proof that our businesses and people want to work together. For Europe, India is a pillar of certainty in an increasingly uncertain world. We know that authoritarian states are getting bolder, ignoring borders, threatening peace at sea. Now is the time to step up our security and defense cooperation on land, at sea and in space.
हमने अपनी टीम्स को एक पारस्परिक लाभकारी बायलैटरल फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट को, एफटीए को इस वर्ष के अंत तक संपन्न करने का निर्देश दिया है। इन्वेस्टमेंट फ्रेमवर्क मजबूत करने के लिए इन्वेस्टमेंट प्रोटेक्शन और जीआई एग्रीमेंट पर भी आगे बढ़ने की बात हुई है। टेक्नोलॉजी और इनोवेशन के क्षेत्र में एक ट्रस्टेड और सिक्योर वैल्यू चेन हमारी साझी प्राथमिकता है। सेमीकंडक्टर, एआई, हाई परफॉर्मेंस कंप्यूटिंग और 6G में सहयोग बढ़ाने पर भी सहमति बनी है। हमने एक स्पेस डायलॉग शुरू करने का निर्णय भी लिया है।
Mithali, you just heard Ursula von der Leyen. You also heard Prime Minister Modi. Now, EU is India's largest trading partner when it comes to India's exports, both goods and services to that region after the US, of course. And then, of course, India-UK trade partnerships happened earlier last week. I want to understand what is really holding these two FTAs back, and do you see a case for, given all that you mentioned and all that is happening in global trade with President Trump and the tariffs between US and the rest of the world pretty much, do you see a real case for FTAs to get finalized both with the EU and the UK by end of this year?
So I think, Karthik, first of all, for India as well as for the UK and Europe, you can see that, this FTA is critical for continuing the growth momentum. I mean, at this point in time, UK and Europe both realize that they also have to, in a manner, go it alone when it comes to negotiating trade agreements with countries like India, with all the BRICS countries, because they are not sure about, the path that the US is going to take. And also, since Brexit, UK and Europe definitely, they also have to work separately. So at this point in time, these two FTAs very critical. What I'm observing is India is in a very, very good position here because everybody is coming to India to work out these FTAs on a one-to-one basis. Even the US, in Prime Minister Modi's visit, actually has committed that we should increase the US-India trade to $500 billion a year. Right. So at the end of the day, I think this really puts us in a very good position with respect to the EU, the UK and the US, the three largest markets of the world.
Okay, so Mithali, how much of this seems to be linked exactly to Trump sort of completing his swing and going ahead and implementing those tariffs that he has been threatening the world with? Do you think if for some reason Donald Trump decides to use tariffs as has been anticipated just as a negotiation tool and not go ahead and implement them despite him repeatedly saying that he will go ahead and implement them, do you think these talks could perhaps take a side seat or a back seat in case Trump doesn't go ahead and implement those tariffs?
No, Karthik. I think that it's very evident that this is in the interest of both the regions, regardless of what happens with Trump tariffs. Because at the end of the day, when you look at the British economy and the slowdown that the British economy itself is, experiencing, they need to strike these deals with India because they need to import a lot more raw materials and a lot more intermediate products from India in order to manufacture high-value goods in the UK. I mean, that's one of the major strategies that the UK has had since many years. Similar strategies being thought of in EU, where they want to focus on more competitiveness in, say, the semiconductor industry, in AI chips, and a lot of the raw materials for that also can be coming in from India. For India, the interest is, of course, that we need to get into these new tech industries and also have that technology transfer from these countries work together and really build up the value addition from our side.
All right, Mithali, Nikore, let's leave it at that this morning. Thank you so much for taking our time this Monday morning and joining us. Well, of course, with these FTAs, my final conclusion seems to be that it's a chicken and egg. Is India first waiting for the FTAs to stitch up, or should India really go ahead and ramp up its manufacturing, which will then lead to greater cost competitiveness when it comes to goods exports in the country? But moving on now to another story which is coming from Niti Aayog member Arvind Virmani. He says India's employment numbers are rising, but real wages for salary workers haven't kept pace with inflation over the past 7 years. Now, Arvind Virmani also points to data from the periodic labor force survey showing that an increase in the worker population ratio is a positive for India. He says this proves that job creation is outpacing population growth. However, while casual workers have seen real wage growth, salaried employees haven't benefited in the same way. Arvind Virmani attributes this to a lack of skilled labor, which limits productivity and wage increase. He emphasized the urgent need to improve education, training and skilling at the district levels to ensure higher wages and economic mobility. Now, with India holding a demographic advantage thus far, he believes the country must seize global opportunities by strengthening its workforce and enhancing supply chains. Virmani calls for both central and state governments to work together in boosting skill development to drive sustainable wage growth and economic progress. Remember, Arvind Virmani's remarks are coming just about a month or so after the economic survey was tabled, and Chief Economic Advisor V. Anant Nageswaran also said that while corporate profits are soaring, India's wage growth for salary employees is not really keeping up with the pace. With that, it's time for a short break. On the other side of the break, we will get you the market open action, but also coming up on the other side would be why SEBI ex-chief Madhabi Puri Buch is now entangled in this corruption case. We will tell you all about it. You're watching Morning Brief at 9.
मैं और आप एक जैसे ही तो हैं। एक बार मंजिल दिख जाए
One shot of a century.
तो उसे पाने के लिए हम अपने कदमों को नहीं रोकते।
That looks out.
पर कभी कभी मेहनत और मंजिल के बीच रह जाता है एक फासला। खैर, मुझे उस फासले को मिटाने के लिए थोड़ी और मेहनत लगेगी, पर शुक्र है आपके पास है टाटा कैपिटल, जो मिटाए फासले आपकी मेहनत और मंजिल के बीच। टाटा कैपिटल, मिटाए फासले।
What does it take to be the greatest in the world? Speed, talent, commitment. But there is one thing which truly sets you apart. Your inner strength. Sodium TMT Reebok, true inner strength.
पढ़ता है, खेलता है, झूलता उछलता है, दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है, आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया, अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया।
What is to the nines? In literal terms, it's perfection. But to us, it's not just a phrase, it's an attitude. One that starts at your desk and sends a statement to the world. To the nines is about taking charge. It's a way of life where every seam, every fold, is crafted with excellence. It's timeless elegance and uncompromising quality made for the corner office. It's the ideas that inspire redefining order and elevating the tabletop. To the nines, for the leaders of today and the visionaries of tomorrow.
Welcome back. You're watching Morning Brief at 9. I'm Karthik Malhotra. First up, let's quickly look at the market action. We told you earlier in the show, GIFT Nifty was indicating a positive start for markets today, and that's exactly what the numbers on the screen and the color of the arrow on the screen also tells you. Both Nifty 50 and Sensex are up about half a percentage point this morning, but still struggling to maintain the 22,500 mark, 22,250 mark on the Nifty and the 73,600 mark on the Sensex. Remember, this is early trading signs which are coming in after Friday's crash of almost 1,400 points on the Sensex and about 400 points on the Nifty, when markets on Friday had crashed about 2%. So from a 2% crash, while the numbers and while the colors tell us that it is a positive start, markets are still well below where they were on Thursday. The positive sign coming in from the mid cap and small cap space as well, but remember, it was the small cap which was also down about 2% on Friday. So just a 0.25% increase is not really the best news that you would have heard or wanting to hear this Monday morning. But how far before markets actually scale back to those levels of September? Well, I'm not sure anybody is putting their bets on that, but the wipeout that we've seen last week as well has been fairly catastrophic for the markets and for erosion of investor wealth. Let's look at the Nifty 50 heat map and look at the stocks in action today. Well, it's a green start for the IT sector. Remember, this was one of the most impacted sectors on Friday. In fact, the entire heat map was red by the time we were closing markets on Friday, but you had seen HCL Tech, Infosys, Wipro down beyond 3%. They are recovering some of those losses this morning, with HCL Tech up about 0.3%, Infi doing better, up about 1.26%, and Wipro is outperforming the entire IT benchmark today, up at about 1.5% or so. Good news coming in from Mahindra and Mahindra as well. M&M is up about 2.2% in trade this morning. Remember, this was one of the stocks that was badly battered when there was news of Tesla driving in electric vehicles into India. So it's the case with Tata Motors. In fact, Tata Motors is still down today, down by about half a percentage point. This stock has also lost about 44-45% of its value, maybe more, since it saw its peak in the month of June, July last year. The stock still trading in the 620, 630 odd levels. On the banking side, we had seen HDFC Bank was one of the outperformers on Friday. This was among the only large stocks which was in the green on Friday, but this morning unable to retain its gain. So this is a Nifty heat map for you early morning on Monday, and let's see how the day and how the week pans out after the bloodiest week it saw last week, losing the maximum it has in 2025. But staying with the mood of the markets, there's been another development, and just a day after Madhabi Puri Buch, SEBI chief, demitted office, completing her 3-year term at the market regulator. Now, a special court in Mumbai has directed the Anti-Corruption Bureau to register an FIR against former SEBI chief Madhabi Puri Buch and 5 other officials in connection with alleged stock market fraud and regulatory violations. Now, there is prima facie evidence of regulatory lapses and collusion requiring a fair and impartial probe. That is what the special ACB court judge Shashikant Eka Rao Bangar said in the order passed on Saturday. The court said it will monitor the probe and has sought a status report within 30 days. But Madhabi Puri Buch, like we told you, is not alone. Apart from Buch, there are other officials against whom the court has ordered the registration of the FIR, and among these are BSE's Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer Sundar Raman Ramamurthy. Its then chairman, remember we are talking about an old case, the then chairman and public interest director Pramod Agarwal, and SEBI's 3 whole-time members. These include Ashwini Bhatia, Anant Narayanan G and Kamlesh Chandra Varshne. Now, SEBI in its statement said it would be initiating appropriate legal steps to challenge this order and remains committed to ensuring due regulatory compliance in all matters. The SEBI said the application, which sought directions to the police to register an FIR and investigate alleged irregularities in granting listing permissions to a company on the Bombay Stock Exchange in 1994, was in fact allowed by the court, even though these officials were not holding their respective positions at the relevant point of time. Now, the Bombay Stock Exchange, in a statement, termed the application as frivolous and vexatious in nature. The court order said the inaction by law enforcement agencies and the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or market regulator SEBI, necessitates judicial intervention under the provisions of the Criminal Procedure Code. Now, what exactly are the allegations and who is the complainant? Well, the complainant is a Sapan Srivastav, a media reporter who's 47 years old, and he has sought an investigation into the alleged offences committed by the proposed accused involving large-scale financial fraud, regulatory violations and corruptions. The allegations pertain to the fraudulent listing of a company on the stock exchange with the active connivance of regulatory authorities, particularly the SEBI, without compliance under the SEBI Act 1992 and rules and regulations thereunder. The complainant claimed that the SEBI officials failed in their statutory duty, facilitated market manipulation and enabled corporate fraud by allowing the listing of a company that did not meet the prescribed norms. Despite approaching the police station and regulatory bodies concerned on multiple occasions reportedly, no action has been taken by them, and this is what the complainant is saying. Now, as per the order, the complainant had submitted documents revealing procedural lapses and non-compliance in the IPO process, leading to an irregular listing of the said company. He had placed on record regulatory filings and stock market reports indicating artificial inflation of share prices and market manipulation. The correspondence from whistleblowers within SEBI indicating undue favoritism towards the accused company. Now, financial reports, audit documents and investor grievances demonstrating large-scale fraud and public deception were also submitted reportedly by the complainant. The complainant has alleged that the accused persons engaged in round-tripping, insider trading and price manipulation, misleading investors into believing the company was financially sound. The court, after considering the material on record, directed the ACB Worli Mumbai region to register an FIR under relevant provisions of the IPC Prevention of Corruption Act, SEBI Act and other applicable laws. Now remember, India's first woman SEBI Chief Madhabi Puri Buch completed her 3-year tenure on Friday and reportedly received no farewell from the staff. It's a norm which has been followed at SEBI, barring of course the COVID years when Ajit Tyagi demitted office, as she has had a checkered relationship with SEBI employees, including protests against her by employees citing unfair work practices. Tuhin Kanta Pandey has taken over as the new SEBI chief. Well, that of course is a developing story which we will be tracking right here on News 9. But before we head into another break, let's quickly look at other global headlines in news this morning. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer urges Europe to take the lead on Ukraine's defense as Trump-Zelensky clash exposes deepening rift in Western support. And following the clash between Trump and Zelensky, tensions between Washington and Kyiv reach a boiling point. So what exactly led to this explosive confrontation? We'll tell you all about that. Like we told you, Wall Street rebounded after a volatile session as tech stocks climbed, but Dell and HP plunged following weak forecasts amid ongoing economic uncertainty. Beijing accuses US of tariff pressure and blackmail after Trump threatens new 10% duty on Chinese imports over fentanyl concerns. Global markets brace for impact as Trump's tariffs are all set to take effect. ECB rate cut looms and China's National Congress sets economic priorities. Crypto market plunges as Bitcoin and other major digital currencies stumble post-Trump election gains amid investor disappointment and economic uncertainty. Germany's Adidas aims to win over more US shoppers as it expands beyond Samba and Gazelle line of shoes, taking on Nike while competing with growing brands like On Running and Hoka. British Airways owner IAG posts 27% profit surge, beats expectations and strong demand with cost controls. Xiaomi launches its flagship 15 Ultra smartphone with Liasa-powered 200-megapixel telephoto lens, aiming for premium market ahead of Mobile World Congress 2025. All these stories on the other side. You're watching Morning Brief at 9.
मैं और आप, हम अलग कहाँ हैं?
Gill on 199.
अपनी अपनी मंजिल पर हम दोनों की नजर है और उसके लिए हम जी जान लगाकर मेहनत करते हैं। पर कभी कभी
He's out on 199.
मेहनत और मंजिल के बीच रह जाता है एक फासला। खैर, मुझे उस फासले को मिटाने के लिए थोड़ी और मेहनत लगेगी, पर शुक्र है आपके पास है टाटा कैपिटल, जो मिटाए फासले आपकी मेहनत और मंजिल के बीच। टाटा कैपिटल, मिटाए फासले।
What does it take to be the greatest in the world? Perseverance, dedication, self-confidence. But there is one thing which truly sets you apart. Your inner strength. Sodium DMD Rebar. True inner strength.
Welcome back. You're watching Morning Brief at 9. Let's look at the global news making headlines today. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer called on European leaders to strengthen their defense commitments, not just to help Ukraine, but to ensure stability across the continent. Speaking at a summit on Sunday, Starmer emphasized the need for a united front as the war enters its 4th year. The gathering brought together world leaders in a strong show of support for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukraine's ongoing fight against Russian aggression. Take a look.
We are at a crossroads in history today. This is not a moment for more talk.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer did not mince words on Sunday about the stakes facing Ukraine and Europe at a summit of world leaders in London.
It's time to act, time to step up and lead.
The summit drew world leaders to support Ukraine and its president Volodymyr Zelensky in the 4th year since Russian forces invaded the neighboring country. Leaders hoped to work toward a peace plan that would end the fighting and guarantee future Ukrainian independence.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't have to play cards.
But overhanging Sunday's summit was Friday's fiery Oval Office face-off that appeared to shred relations between Washington and Kiev.
You're gambling with World War III.
Years of staunch American support for Ukraine and its fight against a Russian invasion appeared to evaporate when U.S. President Donald Trump, who returned to the White House deeply critical of Washington's support for Kiev, erupted in anger at Zelensky.
If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days. I heard it from Putin. In 3 days.
Rather than offering support for an American ally valiantly resisting an unprovoked attack by its larger neighbor, Trump instead castigated the visiting leader, admonishing him to accept the difficult position his country was in. It ended with the visit cut short, and Trump posting on social media that Ukraine was not ready to make peace. The affair sent shockwaves through American allies and prompted pleased responses from American rivals.
Трамп, он прагматик. Вот это его лозунг «здравый смысл».
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov praised Trump's, quote, common-sense approach. The president of Finland said the only winner in the dispute was Russian leader Vladimir Putin.
At the end of the day, there was only one winner of that exchange, that was Vladimir Putin. Having said all of that, probably a wake-up call. And, the conversations that I've had since in the past 72 hours are pretty much about let's move on. Let's get back on track. Let's see what diplomacy can do. And I'm quite convinced that the meeting that we have here in London today is going to give us the first baby steps back to the table.
Our starting point must be to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position now.
Trying to revive hope for peace in Ukraine, Starmer on Sunday unveiled what he called a coalition of the willing, a group of nations willing to put personnel on the line to defend a peace deal if reached.
The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting.
And he announced a $2 billion deal to supply British-made air defense missiles to Ukraine.
I don't think he'd be a tough guy without the United States.
Trump has upended U.S. policy in the 3-year-old war since he returned to the White House in January, casting doubt on its military and political support for Ukraine and Europe, and ending the isolation of Moscow.
All right, that iconic conversation between Trump and Zelensky. Meanwhile, world leaders offered a strong show of support to the Ukrainian president and promised to do more to help his nation. Listen in.
First of all, it's important every chance we get to lay out the facts as clearly as possible. In 2014, Russia chose to invade Ukraine, to occupy Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine. For that, they were kicked out of the G7. And in 2022, they chose to violate the existing ceasefire and invaded Ukraine with the intention of taking Kyiv in 3 days and the entire country in 3 weeks. That has failed. Russia continues to try to fight to claim more land in Ukraine, and we could see an end to this war tomorrow if Russia decided to stop its illegal invasion of Ukraine. On Friday in the Oval Office, President Zelensky pointed out in so many words that Vladimir Putin is a liar and a criminal and cannot be trusted to keep his word in any way, shape, or form, because he has demonstrated time and time again that he will break any agreements. I stand with Vladimir Zelensky, and I stand with the people of Ukraine.
The people of Ukraine are fighting not just for their own national sovereignty. They are fighting for the international rule of law. Australia has committed some $1.5 billion to help Ukraine defend itself. More than $1.3 billion of that is military support. We will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, because
now, following the clash between Trump and Zelensky, tensions between Washington and Kiev have reached a boiling point. According to sources of the Reuters, the fiery exchange between both the leaders was a result of weeks of mounting frustration inside the White House. So, what exactly led to this explosive confrontation? This Reuters report tells you all about it.
Gambling with the lives of millions of people.
The explosive exchange between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House may have seemed like it came out of the blue.
Doing is very disrespectful.
But according to multiple sources familiar with the matter, it follows weeks of frustration in the Trump camp. The US president and his top aides have, the sources said, seen the Ukrainian leader as an obstacle to their goals of quickly ending the war, restoring ties with Moscow, and sealing a potentially lucrative minerals deal.
You should be thanking the president.
It's been a tough thing to watch as an American.
From Washington, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO, John Townsend, described the incident as theatre, though said it was maybe not pre-planned.
It was something where they certainly were not. They didn't hesitate to jump in and make this into a barroom brawl.
Trump has long taken an adversarial approach to Zelensky and Ukraine. But the divide has ballooned in recent days as talks over the much-anticipated minerals deal got bogged down. Two White House officials said there had been no attempt to ambush the Ukrainian president, and US Senator Lindsey Graham said he had hoped the deal would go over well.
What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelensky again.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards.
Townsend, however, likened the exchange to a mafia shakedown.
You better do this. You better sign this. Or, it was just the rudeness of it.
Exasperation over the minerals deal had threatened to derail Zelensky's trip even before it began. One White House official said on Wednesday that they didn't think an invitation made sense after the Ukrainian president appeared to waver on signing. But a deal was later reached for Zelensky to fly out. Trump has, however, had other frustrations. In recent weeks, he's told his closest advisors that he doesn't like the way in which Zelensky has tried to drum up US support for Ukraine. The US president claimed Zelensky has used showmanship to try and win points with the media and Congress.
I think he very much overplayed his hand.
Trump has also openly pushed for elections in Ukraine and blasted Zelensky for not holding them after his 5-year term ran out in 2024. Ukrainian legislation prohibits holding elections during a state of martial law, which was declared the day Russia invaded in February 2022. Trump has also falsely claimed that Zelensky has an approval rating of 4%. A poll this month put it at 63%. At the same time, Trump has been upending decades of US foreign policy by publicly siding with Vladimir Putin and saying he trusts the Russian leader in his desire to end the war. That's a belief that most Western officials rebuke. Kyiv's backers had hoped the deal would help win more support from Trump's Republicans for future aid. Congress last approved assistance for Ukraine in April when Democrats controlled the Senate and Joe Biden was in the White House. Even then, congressional Republicans slow-walked the bill under pressure from Trump. That led to delays in delivering weapons, putting Ukrainian troops on the back foot in the battlefield. Friday's White House meeting ended without a minerals deal being signed and with Zelensky being told to leave. But Townsend says the relationship is repairable. This in and of itself will not stop the process, he said, because both sides want the minerals deal and negotiations with Russia.
And shifting focus back to Trump tariff threats now, Beijing has hit back at Washington, accusing the United States of tariff pressure and blackmail after President Donald Trump threatened to impose an additional 10% tariff on Chinese imports. The move comes as Trump cites the continued flow of fentanyl into the U.S. as a key concern. Take a look.
Beijing accused the United States on Friday of exerting tariff pressure and blackmail. That's after President Donald Trump's latest threat to slap on extra duty of 10% on imports from China. He cited a continued flow of fentanyl into the country. The fresh China tariffs, in addition to a tariff of 10% levied on February the 4th, coincide with the start of China's annual parliamentary meet next week. It's an event at which Beijing is expected to roll out its 2025 economic priorities. In its daily briefing on Friday, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said Washington had used the fentanyl issue to insist on tariff pressure and blackmail. On Thursday, Trump said his proposed 25% tariffs on Mexican and Canadian goods would take effect on Tuesday, along with the extra duty of 10% on Chinese imports. The announcement leaves Beijing less than a week to publish countermeasures. Earlier on Friday, China's Commerce Ministry said it had some of the world's toughest anti-drug policies and highlighted the risks new tariffs would bring to global supply chains. Analysts say Beijing still hopes to strike a deal with the Trump administration, but trade talks have so far not materialized, and the White House is ramping up signs it's preparing for a wider economic decoupling from China.
And after a massive rise and then a slump in the cryptocurrency market ever since Donald Trump has taken office on January 20th, Trump on Sunday, again, this time named 5 cryptocurrencies under consideration for a new US strategic reserve, sending their value skyrocketing and partly reversing a recent slump. Donald Trump named 5 cryptocurrencies now under consideration, and let's look at what these currencies are. Now, in a post on his Truth Social network, the US president said a working group that he set up shortly after taking office is moving forward with the reserve, which will include 3 smaller cryptocurrencies, namely XRP, Solana and Cardano. The value of all 3 digital currencies shot up on the news, with XRP trading up around 34%, Solana gained around 22% and Cardano rose more than 63%. Now remember, cryptocurrency prices were down sharply in recent weeks, with some of the biggest digital currencies erasing nearly all the gains they made after Donald Trump's election win triggered a wave of excitement across the industry. German sports footwear maker Adidas is looking to expand its reach in the US market, but can it win over more American shoppers from the US competitor Nike? Now, according to analysts, that will be crucial for the German sportswear giant's success this year. While its Samba and Gazelle sneakers have been big hits in the US, Adidas now needs new sources of growth to stay competitive. More details in this report.
The key to Adidas's continued success this year is whether it can win more US shoppers from market leader Nike, analysts said. That's as the German brand looks for new sources of growth beyond its Samba and Gazelle sneakers. There's uncertainty over whether consumer demand in China will recover, and it's prompted many brands, including in the luxury sector, to focus on US shoppers as a growth driver for 2025. In pursuit of this, Adidas recently partnered with LA brand Sporty & Rich for a collegiate Americana line, and also collaborated with US musician Pharrell Williams and 2 US athletes. CEO Bjorn Gulden has turned Adidas around since it cut ties with rapper Ye and scrapped the Yeezy sneaker line in 2022. And shares in Adidas have risen 160% since Gulden's appointment was announced the following month. Investors expect him to ensure Adidas keeps gaining market share from Nike, while also fending off newer sportswear brands like On Running and Hoka when it reports full-year results in March. Data showed Nike's share of the global sportswear market fell to 14.1% last year from 15.2% in 2023, while Adidas's market share increased to 8.9% from 8.2%, with other gainers including New Balance, On Running and Hoka. Overall, Adidas sales grew 19% in the quarter to the end of December and 12% over 2024 as a whole. However, Nike sales were down 9% in its quarter ending November the 30th last year. An analyst said Adidas's overall sales should keep growing by at least 10% annually, as long as Nike is struggling.
British Airways owner IAG has reported a strong financial performance with a 27% jump in annual operating profit. The airline group exceeded market expectations by keeping costs in check while benefiting from strong growth on its highly profitable routes. Now, investors will be watching closely to see if IAG can maintain this momentum as competition in the aviation sector intensifies.
British Airways owner IAG reported a 27% jump in annual operating profit on Friday. The numbers beat market expectations as the company curbed costs, and growth in its lucrative transatlantic routes took off. European airlines overall have struggled in the past year with spiralling costs and delivery delays. IAG, which also owns Spanish Airlines, Iberia and Vueling, said it was confident about delivering margins and returns. The group said it plans a $1 billion share buyback. That was after announcing an annual operating profit of $4.62 billion. In stark contrast to other European airline stocks, IAG shares have soared in the past year. They were up around 5% in morning trade. The group has benefited from limited delivery delays, strong demand and resilience in its core transatlantic routes. IAG pointed to possible plane delivery delays this year from Airbus and Boeing. It also said it's looking to put in an order for another round of wide-body planes. Lufthansa and Air France KLM report their full-year results next week.
Chinese phone maker Xiaomi unveiled their Series 15 of devices in Barcelona ahead of the opening of the Mobile World Congress Tech Conference. Xiaomi, the world's third largest smartphone maker, launched its new flagship smartphone based on the Ultra, with the base model starting at $895. That's the latest coming in from what is happening at Barcelona. Xiaomi coming up with headlines. And before we end the show, the markets have turned into negative territory again this morning. Remember, the markets had a positive start, but now in the red. Sensex and Nifty, which had gained about half a percentage point in the morning, are now struggling to even maintain Friday's levels. In fact, down 0.2 and 0.3% Nifty 50 and Sensex respectively, with the small cap taking a much larger 1.2% beating after the 2% market crash that we saw on Friday. So the early gains in the market have been reversed. Not positive news coming in as the day progresses. A quick look at the Nifty 50 heat map, and let's see which are the companies which are dragging the markets. Reliance Industry is down 3.1%. Tata Motors is down about 1.2% this morning, and HDFC continuing with its loss of about 0.5%. In fact, the entire energy sector seems to be struggling today. ONGC down about 2.5%. Coal India down about 3.3% or so. Bad news coming in from the markets this morning. Stay tuned to all other news and updates which News 9 would be bringing to you all day long. You're watching Morning Brief at 9. Thank you very much for watching. News continues right here on News 9.
Every brand tells a story, and they are the storytellers, the Sutradhars. They present a brand with band, baja and barat to you. They are the Brandwala.